I do want to say one thing, and that is that you've probably now got the idea that capacity assessment is the capacity, you're assessing the person's capacity to make a particular decision, and the decision's about treatment. And so before you, if you're the authorised officer or the approved specialist, what you're going to be doing is forming a view for yourself before you even see the person as whether they're in the ballpark or not of needing this act. You're not going to go in with a blank slate, you're going to have an idea. And if it sounds like the person shouldn't be being assessed, you want to try and not get them into this process. That could come about because the family is very enthusiastic for an assessment to take place, or there's some sort of pressure or something like that, some legal thing that could be averted if they got into this. None of those are good reasons to do this. And you also know that compulsory treatment of addiction itself is not not a great thing in terms of success. So, this is not keeping the person from getting the holy grail of treatment. So what is the function of this? Well, really, the function of this whole process is to get the person to the point where they will make their own decision. And the only thing that can change, the only thing that this Act really allows to change in that is their capacity to make that decision. So, the sort of problems are, do they sound like they lack that capacity? And what are the kinds of things that you're hearing that make you think that they lack that capacity? What are the cognitive problems they've been having? Because capacity in this Act is a cognitive test. It's not about their desires or their wills or their values. It's about whether they know the facts of the problem, whether they understand the consequences of those facts, whether they can weigh up information you give them and come to a decision and take that decision. That's what it's testing. It's not testing whether you agree with the way they feel about laws or not. And that may be a problem, but that's what the law says. I never set out in the talk I prepared to tell you how to engage a person. One of the things you've got to know about capacity assessment, though, is you've got to give the person a fair chance. So when we talk about doing capacity assessments in other contexts, we want to give the person every chance to make their own decision. In this situation, you may or may not want to do exactly that. You've got to give them a fair chance. I'm standing opposite a human rights lawyer, so I'll be careful what I say, but if you're hearing a situation where there's extreme risk, you may be a little more testing, a little less testing about the capacity. You may think, well, this is so dangerous, this situation, and this is clearly the thing really that needs to happen for this person now. Not emergency treatment, that's not what I'm talking about, but for the addiction, as an addictions specialist, you're thinking that, clinically, I think this is really the thing that's got to happen now for this person. I'm convinced of that from the information I've heard. So, they're going to need to give me a damn good answer to the capacity tests for me to not put them under the Act. You still, especially the approved specialist, has to do an assessment. You don't get to rubber stamp the thing. So when the person comes in front of you, there has to be something they can say to you that gets them out of it. Otherwise, there's no point in doing an assessment. So what they might have to say is something very nuanced about why the situation is different now and different to the way everybody else thinks it is. And, that they just didn't realise this person had come to some sort of realisation. Epiphany, as Doug Selman says, which doesn't really happen. But anyway, they may have come to something that they can tell you, look, it is really different now, and you must be open at least to some extent to hear that, and perhaps believe it. But I think what I'm saying is you'll have assessed from the information you had before the assessment that that's very unlikely to happen. And with very high risk, you might say, well, it'll have to be a dramatic kind of epiphany, something very convincing for me not to put them under the Act. They've always got the out of the judge. It's not, but the other thing, especially from people outside Christchurch, there's really little point in making such a finely graded capacity decision. They get down to Christchurch and they get sent back straight away because they already have capacity the day after they arrive. So if you think it's that poised, then probably it's the wrong decision to put them under the Act. It's got to be clear. It's got to be a clear lack of capacity. The criteria about severity, in this case we sort of put together among us. How would this case sit with you guys as people who work in the field about a severe enough addiction to consider putting under the Act? Is this the kind of person you think you might get requests for? Or do you think would it need to be worse? What about it would need to be worse? Yeah. So the other sort of things that you wonder about, I suppose, are, do you trust the information you're getting? Is there any reason to mistrust this information? That's one of the questions you sort of always wonder in conflicted families, if you didn't write a story. We didn't write it as any particular fishhooks in that. It wasn't meant to be, tricky. Of course, there always might be problems, but we assume that that's reasonably good information. And what about other things you might do? Because one of the questions is, I mean, is this act the right thing to do right now? Or is there something else you should be doing at this stage before you get on the track of addiction treatment? So what about that question? Is there any medical or psychiatric... This act out of the equation. So this guy turns up in your office for some reason, Paul brings him in, just very worried about it, which isn't for compulsory addiction treatment, but this is the story. Do those problems, those medical concerns that you just talked about, mandate doing something, and if so, how would you do it? And how would you make it? What's great about this is that you have to have a very fine sensitivity to some medical problem going on, and then you have to figure out what you can reasonably do about that. And you may have some solution to the GP may actually know better than we're portrayed, and may be willing to see him and say, look, he's been like this for a long time, and there's nothing about this that has changed terribly much. These bumps on the head have happened over a long time. It may be. And then you're faced with the question of if he says, well, look, I don't want any medical investigations. I actually just want to carry on doing what I'm doing. So I'm sort of giving you an unsatisfactory solution to the concern you have. And you'd want to sort of just tick in your mind that he has the capacity to make that refusal. It's not just a blanket refusal. He hasn't actually taken on board what you're saying at all. But like you say, I think that's right. I'd be saying, there's no point in going further down that track now. You've got those reassurances. They're the reasonable reassurances you can get. The assurance I'm talking about is that there isn't a pressing medical issue that you can or must do something about.
About medical, yeah. You're still left with your problem of
absolutely. No, we haven't got past that. But what I'm sort of trying to go through is the fact that you deal with other stuff first. There's something else there. Likewise, with somebody who says they're suicidal or mutters in the mix they're suicidal. Got a meth addict we're dealing with at the moment in Hawke's Bay, and what he does is he says he's suicidal when he wants to get out of trouble. So when the police pick him up, he always says he's suicidal and hearing voices. So he always ends up in the psych unit, and it drives him crazy, but that's what happens. And he's able to do it so well that people believe him. And of course you can't fully be sure that he's not actually going to try and harm himself in some way, because he's that impulsive and that desperate that he may. So, the psychiatric assessment is also something you may need to do. But this act doesn't help you for any of that. This act comes after all that's done. So now we're a bit further down the track. You've either got something done medically, haven't, because you can't, and you now want to look at this act. So the questions about his severity are ticked. The questions about appropriate treatment, that's something that, it's not part of a capacity discussion. There has to be a place for him to go. So what I think the point about that is, my interpretation, is that you kind of got to plan this a little bit. You can't do this cold. You can't suddenly have people walk in from the street with a bundle of information and expect an admission to a rehab facility that afternoon or the following day or a day or two later. That's just not going to happen. It has to be something that you get information and sort of decide beforehand, right, we're going to go on this track. It's an elective procedure, if you like. So the bed's arranged. And you've decided that, and I think we've tried to portray that in this scenario, that other treatments wouldn't be better. Some sort of counselling in outpatients or whatever wouldn't be an appropriate better option. All right, so now regarding his capacity, does anyone speak about that? Grounds for worrying about his capacity? That's kind of obvious. Cognitive problems? Mm-hmm. Yeah? What are the kinds of cognitive problems that you think he may have at the moment?
I forgot that he's been seen somewhere or other. Forgot that he's drinking.
Yeah. So I think
not getting dressed properly or not cleaning up or whatever.
Yeah. So what's the argument that you're sort of thinking about diagnostically there?
Has he got a dementia?
Sounds like he's getting some sort of chronic, it's not just a moment of intoxication and blackout, it's something that's persisting, isn't it? If it was something that was just due to severe intoxication and when he came right, those problems weren't there and he did a bit of a tidy up and he covered for himself in some way, you'd expect that if he went to rehab, he'd come right within 3 or 4 days and the whole thing would fall over, so it would be utterly pointless. You really do need to be convinced there's a process going on that's going to take a bit of time to resolve. Otherwise this process seems to me to have no point. I try to make the case that this is an enduring, sort of more enduring problem than just acute. You'll think about this sort of approach to cognitive testing in this situation. So you're doing assessment, the person's in front of you. It's a difficult sort of interview, I imagine. I'm sort of seeing quite toady patients here. They don't really want to be there. They're not heck of a delighted with the whole thing. And now you want to do some cognitive testing. What are your views about that? A researcher at the Australian National Institute of Drug research, who does cognitive neuroscience as part of her thing. She's mainly just impulsivity. But I said, what do you think about this thing? Do you think it should be structured or unstructured? And she said, well, as a non-clinician, she's a scientist, as a non-clinician, it seems fairer that you do the same thing for everybody. You have some structure. That seems fairer. So, but she's not a clinician. She doesn't know how hard that is to do. I then looked for tests that were very brief. The 6-item cognitive testing. They're really aimed at dementia, like Alzheimer's disease and stuff like that. There's the question of intoxication. Look, I think I'd favour something structured, whatever it is, because then the rehab people can repeat it a few days later and see how it's changed for a start. So, and the other thing is it'd be quite nice to be able to talk in peer review with the colleagues. Like we're finding people, we've got a lot of patients who we put under this act, and they tend to score right around about here, so you can sort of self-audit, by comparing your standards with other people. But the problem is, I think, the difficulty will be, frontal function, which are more difficult to test, and that's very impaired when they're drinking, can improve quite a bit. Dense memory problems are pretty easy to pick up whether you use a structured test or not. So I think there are arguments either way up, but I think clearly in the very, very uncooperative patient you're not going to do anything other than the basic questions. The idea is to have the concept of asking a few questions about attention span, orientation. Is this person acutely delirious? Do you need to go back to that medical thing? Do you need to go back to a kind of detox type thing? Or is it definitely the right moment in your interview? Because your interview is there to validate the history in a way. Or is this just the chronic muddleness of somebody who's developing alcoholic dementia and just proceed? Right, so regarding his capacity to make this decision, what do you think about that as we've portrayed it here? He doesn't know the facts of the situation as far as you can ascertain. Yeah. And he's going to have to wise up. This is a serious business if he this is his chance to tell you what he does know, isn't it? And that's part of the engagement process. You've got to really convince the person that this is their last chance to sort of really make an argument. They do know what's going on, but they want to do it anyway. And if he can't marshal information. So we thought really, looking at other audiences and so forth, it seems to me that the knowing information is in a way the easiest bit to decide whether they know enough or not. Now the problem with capacity assessment, it's a medico-legal concept, not just a medical concept or clinical concept, it's a medico-legal concept. And this has come up in other discussions. We can see a whole grading of capacity, can't we? From somebody who's minimally capacitous to somebody who knows everything about the problem. And we can sort of spread the population of people we see over that whole range without much difficulty. But the law says there's I quote, a bright line. And the bright line is, you're one side of it or the other, you've got to decide. So you've got to try and match your findings up with your concept of what you think the legal standard is. So how much loss of information, how would you go through the process of deciding that his not knowing about his treatment, let's take that as an example, doesn't know that he's being treated for alcoholism before, doesn't think he's actually got a serious drinking problem, doesn't think these issues that are going on at home, this neglect and so forth, is significant at all. It's not an issue. His daughter's a fussy person as far as he's concerned. Very nice, well-meaning, but worries too much. And you should all just bugger off and leave him alone. Right? So how do you make that an argument that the person lacks capacity at the point they need to be under the Act? What are your thoughts? So he's got these gaps in information. The retaining is tested by when he exposes himself not knowing, early in the interview, you then tell him. You say, look, these are the things we're concerned about, this is why we're concerned about them. And, you give him the best shot knowing this, and then you come back and see if he's able to take it on board. And that's where he's got the chance to be clever and say, yeah, I know that this was said, or something along those lines, which really makes it quite difficult. But he may still not retain it, even though you've told him. And that really makes a strong case for the gap. So what you're doing, John Macmillan is our colleague who's Professor of Bioethics in Dunedin, and he describes this as making a case for incapacity. So you're not sort of assigning a number or something like that. It's not a clinical finding in the normal sense. What you're doing is making an argument that here's a decision about treatment. It's compellingly important that this treatment should be given because there are huge problems going on. That he's going to possibly die from this, or it's certainly going to be a tragic sort of process. So there really is a need for some intervention now. And there's an organic process you believe is going on to cause this problem. That's not essential in the law, but it's very useful to explain why you can recognise the man had capacity at some point and now you're saying he doesn't. there's this process going on. And you think this could be perhaps helped with time and support and so forth. I think that's probably the main process: nutrition, time, treating something or the other, and then you hope to maybe get better. But as a result of these things, the serious situation, the problem that seems to be going on, he just doesn't know the facts of this decision. So if you were thinking of an informed consent model, like the medical council says, he couldn't give or withhold informed consent about this treatment because he doesn't know, he can't keep it in his brain the facts. Yeah. The question that's being asked about this retaining is how long for and how much information do you have to retain. And so I think, again, this is where you've got some discretion. I mean, you can set the bar sort of as high or as low as possible, but you've got to make this as an argument to a judge, haven't you? You've got to be able to say, look, this is why I think this is a reasonable opinion to form on those steps. So, I mean, this guy was saying he really isn't retaining a lot of information, and when we tell him, he still doesn't seem to take it on board for whatever reason. He can't keep it in his brain. How long for? I would say it's only for the period of your assessment, really. I mean, your assessment might be an hour, but you don't have to do this assessment twice. There's nothing at all saying this should be done at 2 different times. When we do assessments of testamentary capacity, where it's a thing that's going to go on forever, so we might say, right, we want them to remember this for a week or 2 weeks or a month. What a colleague talks about a month. There's a different kind of capacity, and there may be other reasons for saying they need to retain it for longer in that situation. In this situation, we're really just talking about retaining it for long enough to do the next step, which is to use away that information. Now what do people think about that criteria, using and weighing? Seems to be a more nuanced process, doesn't it? I mean, it needs more information. It's not just one thing or the other that you're remembering or forgetting. It's some sort of weighing up, and so you remember at least 2 things, which is saying this or that, and the advantages of this or this for the disadvantages. So you're starting to remember multiple things, really. So it's a higher bar, I suppose.
Can I just add the thing about, I was joking about insight before. It is a psychiatric term that doesn't actually appear in any sort of legal thing or legislation, and there is actually a lot of literature about what insight means, because I'm just sort of warning you about the language. We all sort of tend to want to use it because they don't really understand. But it also imposes a sort of a evaluative sort of aspect to it. In my worldview, they don't understand why, living on the streets and drinking is not a good idea. So I don't know if you sort of want to tease that out, but it is a kind of, they talk about normative bias, about the idea that the assessor is really kind of looking at it from their point of view. So I'm just sort of flagging. So, for example, psychologists talk about psychiatrists using insight, and so I mean there is a sort of a bit of a tension about how you might phrase that idea.
So I mean, I'm not a trained forensic psychiatrist. I just do forensic psychiatry. I'm a general psychiatrist, so I'm not going to talk as if I'm a trained forensic psychiatrist. But what's been very interesting about doing forensic psychiatry is you have to tell the court, the judges and the lawyers, what's wrong with a person in plain language. You can't use jargon. And terms like insight will get you into trouble because it's using a kind of a jargon term that in our world seems like we're making it quite an important statement, and it is actually. It's quite a good shorthand for explaining a problem to another psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse. But it's not very good when you talk to other people, as they see it as us making a judgment, because the nuances are lost. The word doesn't capture all the nuances. So what I write instead is the patient knows that they have a problem, and they know the problem includes things like hearing voices. And they think the cause of the hearing voices is the drugs they used. But they don't think they've got an enduring illness that requires them to take medication. So you can break down the word insight into just the beliefs the person has about what you're talking about. You don't need to use the word insight, I would argue. And I think that's what I was saying. It's more useful to actually not use... I mean, if you use the word insight, expect to be questioned as to what you mean. But there's quite a nice way around it. All right, so using weighing, going back to that, does anybody else want to sort of say anything about that? In general capacity assessments, that's the area you have the most difficulty, but in addictions, what seems to me is that clinicians and probably patients are very used to this discussing the pros and cons of it. It's a very normal part of addiction dialogue. So I think it'll be an easy area to go into. I'm not sure how often these cases will hinge on that criterion versus the first one. I think if you think of people, the people I think of with alcoholic dementia don't get as far as using and weighing, they just don't remember the stuff. And so it may actually be that there are other cases, we've had discussions about sort of methamphetamine addicts who are very set on doing a certain thing, who are not really using and weighing because they're so set on one particular point of view, they're paying lip service to it, if you like. The question is, do you foresee being able to find those people that capacity? What's your view about that? Do you think that they are people who you might be trying to get under the act through lacking capacity? Because until now, I think there'll be mums, middle-class mums with their off-the-rails kids who are using meth like mad, and will bring them in for assessment for compulsory treatment, and they'll say they don't have any insight into the situation, they can't possibly have capacity, you've got to commit them. And I'm tape recording the interview to show my lawyer if you don't, right? On my cell phone. So what are you going to do about that? What is your rationale going to be that sort of person can't come into the act? I mean, I think it's quite tricky. I don't have a glib answer to that, but can you see the problem? These are highly emotive situations. And this is the main reason, I suppose. You're not going to try and categorise ordinary folly as incapacity. People are allowed to do stupid things. They're allowed to choose to do stupid things, even if they could die from it. I think that girl is dead later. This is on the internet. And nobody would say she lacked capacity. She knew exactly what she was doing, which is why she took herself. So all you can do, I think, is go through a structural process with somebody in the using and weighing. I don't really think you can get to somehow mind reading whether they really believe in what they're saying. Obviously that's what you're trying to ascertain, and you've got to be quite sensible about it. But if they can go through, the legal test is a cognitive test, right? So if they can demonstrate an ability for you to cognitively weigh out the different options. I know my mum says I should not use methamphetamine, I'm using all my money for it. I know people say it's bad for you, but I like doing it. The only reason I'm doing it is because I like doing it. I know that this is what people say will happen, and I don't dispute this might happen. But that's what I want to do, right? And the option to go to rehab doesn't appeal at all. I don't want to sit around with a whole lot of other buggers who just can't see the fun in it. I mean, that seems to me...
And the bad things that could happen won't happen to me.
Well, actually I talked to somebody about this very thing in Hawke's Bay Prison about a year ago with this thing on the horizon. And I asked him, he'd been... So the other thing is the futility of trying to put somebody like this under the act so that they'll regain capacity. What you're asking really is to put them in the act so they change their mind. Now this is not an act for people to change their mind. It's to regain capacity. So... Anyway, so this guy be in prison for 9 months or a year or something like that. I mean, he'd never be in rehab that long. So whatever was going to happen had the chance to happen. And I said to him, pots, no, I'll stop that, that's shit. Alcohol, don't really use alcohol, not good. Ecstasy, etc., meth. But I love meth. I love it. But you live in a dog kennel, you've got no teeth. You're 21. Your parents are all worried on my case. They expect me to do something. They want you to do something. They'll do anything to help you. I don't give a shit. And I could not really say he didn't know what he was saying. He seemed to know the facts of the situation and was just intent on that decision. I mean, there are people who say that is a lack of capacity, and I completely appreciate that. I don't think this law allows that to be determined like that, though. Debate about this, I think, is now outside the law, and it's really about anorexia, where somebody called Jacinta Tan's written an article talking about this very thing, about the limits of capacity assessment. She used the MCAT, which is the American sort of version, very, very similar. And she found that anorexics who were severely ill, all from the Oxford area, so they're probably, middle-class people who kind of good prospects educationally and all that sort of thing, they were like that actually from the description, knew what was the best thing to do regarding their eating disorder, but said they just didn't want to do that. You should come in for treatment, and they could say, yes, I know that, I know that's the reasons. Some didn't think that it really applied to them, but generally the problem was not that. They scored, because with MCAT you can get a score, and they scored fine on the MCAT. Their actual numbers were quite good. They passed the test, is what I'm saying, what she was saying. But the problem was they didn't want the treatment. Now, her argument in that article was the test should be a bit different. The test should be something about their capacity to want the right thing. But that's not what the test is. So we can fantasize about how we should have a test that says if you don't want to stop being an alcoholic, you should be committed. But that's not what we have. And that's perhaps frustrating, I think. Any questions about assessing this? I mean, one of the things that I find quite useful is that last thing, which is particularly in somebody with my experiences with dementia, not with this, because none of us have experience with this, is, if something were to change, you're living at home, you want to carry on living at home, that's a kind of a values-based decision, I suppose. I wouldn't want to move out of my home for anything. I've lived there for a long time, paid for it myself. None of my family ever before me had a home of their own. I had one all my life, and now you want to take me out of it. Okay. Very, very bad situation. Right, you can take them out of their home. And so the kind of question you end up asking is, well, so can you imagine a scenario in which you would change your mind? If something were to happen, and then you give a few concrete examples if they can't think of any, and see if they have any ability to change their mind at all about it. And hopefully, most people will say, actually, if something really bad happened, I would, but, it's of a guy who went on a hunger strike in prison, and some people may know about this case, All Means All. What was interesting about All Means All was that he went on this hunger strike. The interesting thing about this guy is that, firstly, when you present the case of All Means All, a person who was prepared to die from hunger striking because of his grievance about something or the other, you always get some psychiatrists think you should commit him because he must have a psychiatric disorder. You couldn't think that without a psychiatric disorder. Okay. So presented this case in peer review, and various team psychiatrists said they missed something. So I said, well, 5 psychiatrists saw it. I mean, they didn't miss something. I think we've got to take it that they knew what they were doing. No, it's not possible. Okay, so you will always get criticised by somebody. I presented another case of a hunger strike in Hawke's Bay prison a few months ago, 2 or 3 months ago now. Same thing happened. Got a second opinion from another psychiatrist who usually disagrees with me about stuff. We're very different characters, but he agreed with me about that. The person had capacity to make this decision. He had a grievance about the prison system, the security classification. He was going to hunger strike to death. Presented in peer review, and sure enough, in that different group of peers, one guy stands up and says, he definitely should be committed. So I said, well, how can you commit him? He's not mentally ill. He's got no history of mental illness. He's pissed off because his security classification is wrong. He knows what's going to happen. You can't let somebody die. So risk becomes a dominating thing. But interestingly, in the case of All Means All, what he said afterwards was, it was crazy. I was actually killing myself, but it kind of was suicide. And that's kind of, it seemed a bit crazy looking back. I got so set in my plan that I didn't. And so what does that mean for the assessment at the time?
Yeah,
he said that. Yeah. So he didn't say he was trying to commit suicide in the normal sense, but he said effectively that's what it was. It was like he reflected back afterwards and said, "Wow, that was that kind of got a bit out of hand." That's kind of what he was saying. So is this a case that somebody gets boxed into a corner, gets more sick, and then fails to sort of use and weigh properly? I mean, they know what's going to happen. They answer all the questions. They're not stupid, and they're not really mentally ill. So that's not confirming that. But is the capacity test good then? We had a very complicated guy who would come into Hawke's Bay casualty from time to time. He's had numerous domestic problems, police problems, etc., etc. He came in after a fall in a stand-up with police, fractured his pelvis, big bleed inside the pelvis, and the ED officers presented him, ED consultant presented him as a capacity case at Granround, because that night what they wanted to do was to embolise the bleeder. So X-ray procedure, take, half an hour, no real problem. And he said, no, at this point I'd rather die. And there was a standoff with the police saying, we're going to commit him. They started a committal process. The psychiatrist came out and said, no, he's not mentally ill, I can't commit him. And there was a big divide among people who said he had capacity and he didn't have capacity. And so I came down on the side of saying I didn't think he did have capacity. Because I thought he was personality disordered, he was highly distressed at the time, it was a very emotionally charged situation, and I didn't think that he could use and weigh information properly in that tense circumstance. So I would have favoured treating him against his will. But he passed the structural test of capacity. He sort of knew what was going to happen, and he knew the consequences, and he said, okay. So there was a big division in the audience. I mean, we never went to court. What happened was it stopped bleeding. So he didn't die after all. All dire predictions. You've got to grasp that, actually, and say, right, I'm going to do this assessment in good faith now, and everybody's waiting outside the room for me to sign this piece of paper, right? Exactly. There's a huge amount of pressure. And I'm not going to do it. Because I'm not satisfied that last chance of him going back we've done that. I mean, I don't care if other people think it has. I'm not signing this form. You have to be quite staunch, I think. If you're not satisfied, that's all been done. So with this meeting in Hall's Bay, what I've said to the consultant in the board is, look, actually I think he passes the capacity test, and I think we're going to have to go with a partial sort of freedom from the board, and we're going to have to see what happens. So that's also about how you conduct this interview. And that idea of a crowd waiting outside the door for your answer is something you really have to resist quite strongly, because what you need is a bit of time to be able to sit with the person. And if you can't engage them in structural tests, I think you need to be accepting of that. I mean, the most important thing is to engage the person in a conversation. And what your conversation has to be about is about that very thing Darren has talked about, which is, well, I'm going to tell you all the things you need to know. Let's just stop for a moment and have a really careful think about this. So these really are the sort of options available. And can you talk about them? What the pros and cons are. And if they have a cognitive blind spot that damaged their brain in some way, I think it's unlikely they'll ever get to the point of taking on board the information and manipulating it. If you can do some tests that shows that there's a problem in the brain, that's helpful. But even if you can't, you can say, well, no matter what I did, I could not. So with this, there's another case which the judge gave quite a long judgment on, in which the judge actually repeated all the tests I've done. It wasn't really about cognitive testing at all. It was about sitting with this woman and talking about her home and why she wanted to stay in her home and she just couldn't shift off a particular view. Her view was, that she had to be in her home for various reasons. Not the ordinary things, but things like, the hospital wasn't right, the magnetic waves would affect her. All the things she suggested, she had some rather peculiar reason that never changed, and she could not contemplate any other way of seeing it. She didn't seem able to do it. And I was sure of that when I'd spent a lot of time with her. I went back the next day. I mean, you can't do that in this case necessarily, but I went back the next day. There's nothing saying you can't go back the next day, but it's impractical to always do that. I just found she was not able to. So I was quite confident in saying to the judge, look, so then the judge did it all again, and I thought, oh shit, now she's going to change her point of view, and I'm going to look completely stupid, like I wasn't a really caring doctor or something. Anyway, she was no different to the judge, and the judge eventually got exasperated and said to her, take it away and tell her you've got to make, she's got to think of something different. And came back in half an hour, and she still didn't come up with anything different. So I can't approve. But I was quite relieved at this. But it's hard because addictions are so long. I picked it up when I was a bit greener and doing these workshops, and I started thinking, for this last 2 weeks, I was thinking, you talk about somebody who may have a 20 or 30, they may have an addiction for as long as the informant's whole life. The daughters come in, but for her whole life, the father's still this way because he's had the addiction. So, yes, that's right. Anthony Duncan talks about dispositional autonomy, or sort of what you'd usually want to do. And are you simply doing what you'd usually want to do? And I think that's actually his point. There's importance to that. But the test here is you can't do business as usual. Something's happened and you can't carry on like this so long. Can you contemplate at all doing something different? The other thing that they've got to do is they've actually got to put some of this into effect. It doesn't fit into the test nicely. Alison, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see in the legal test it says, they must actually do what they're saying. But there's no point in going through all this if you know very well they're not going to do what they're saying. So they have a discussion with you, they say, well, for this and this reason, which sounds all convincing, I'm actually going to do things differently now. But you just know that's unlikely. So what is the point? You have to be convinced that it is likely they'll do it, or that there's a reasonable chance they'll do it. Otherwise, it's a futile exercise and you're wasting time. I would explain why I thought that was implausible if I was writing a report to the end of it all. You've got to be able to articulate in your mind reasons why you think that's just not likely. And so it'll be a common sense type of argument. It's a way of saying they're paying lip service to this test, but they don't. There's something about the actual execution of this you don't think they're able to do.
So it's not only about unable to make a decision, it's unable to take actions too. So it's a bit broader than, the law says that the person is unable to do these certain things around the decision, but it's sort of interpreted to be a bit long, so it can be. So he said that he would do this, and he said that 3 times, on this time, that time, and that time, but he's actually been unable to act on what he said he would do, which might be to accept treatment, as well as making...
it's difficult, the law doesn't spell it out, so you're quite right to say where does it fit into the law, but But in a way, a person, often the reason you'll say that, I mean, we'll come back to the reason why you might say that as a clinician. The reason you'll say that is because it's been done before. You can't do it because you just have a gut feeling. That's not good enough. But if it's been done before, so then you'll have that discussion with the person. You'll have to have the discussion with the person. Okay, so you say you'll definitely do it this time, but what is different this time compared to last month and the month before? And you want them to come up with something that is different, that's believably different. If they can't do that, then I think you have to say, well, look, I know you really want it to be different, but I don't see that there's anything that is going to change. And that will be your argument, I think you'd make. Saying, I think you'd probably be saying they're not able to account for the problems that have occurred. They're problems that have occurred. Last time they did this, in the case of this lady I was talking about who wanted to stay in her home, she would never let any caregiver in. And so we said, well, we'd support you at home, but you need to have people coming in to check on you. But she never would. And she actually, to be fair, wouldn't really fully agree to it either. But she just couldn't get past that point. There was a sort of rigidity of saying one thing but actually never changing that no matter what you said, which was something to do with not knowing it and something to do with not being able to weigh up the importance of changing. So, practical questions. What are you going to do if the person's too intoxicated to assess? How are you going to handle that? Neurotolerance, so they're freakers, but they actually conduct their lives at the level they conduct them consistently, and there'll be a time when it's better to see them and a time when it's clearly worse.
So there are coercive powers. Section 21 says that you can actually get assistance in arranging the specialist assessment, which essentially means that you can call for police assistance. So I sort of do wonder though if, dragging them along in such a way is really going to really sort of
that's the other question,
the purposes of the Act. But that's why it is an involuntary assessment law as well as treatment, and it's different from the Triple PR Act because there'll be plenty of clinicians and people under the Mental Health Act who are trying to use the Triple PR Act to get people along for certain things, and there's no coercive power like we do have for children, for example. We can get a warrant from the family court and say, hello, I'm taking the child away, but you can't do that with adults, unless you're under these laws, like this. So,
I mean, what do you think about this business of using... So the next question was, what about the person just refusing to come to the assessment?
Or coming and refusing to talk to you?
Yeah. So what do you think about that? So firstly, the person refuses to come is an easy answer, you can make them come. But they come and they refuse to talk to you. What do you think about that? And they know that your job is to prove incapacity, so the best thing is to say nothing, because then you can't prove it. You have exceptionally good capacity. I think you, your first job is to engage the person. And if talking about something else is the way you're going to engage them, then that's legitimate. I mean, you're not going to do something completely else, but the last time we got pissed together kind of thing is not probably a good conversation. But I think that talking about other stuff to bring yourself around to the point of maybe asking a few questions that will illustrate their capacity is perfectly sensible. I think one of the most important things to remember at the beginning, because like Darren, I don't have an answer to this. I don't have a good answer to this, but you have to remember that the interview with you, as if you're the authorised officer, you're a gatekeeper, and they won't get anything more done if they can convince you they have capacity. Or if you're the approved specialist, same thing, they won't have to go to read if they can prove it to you. You're going with the presumptive capacity, but there's a decision that has to be made, and that's not being asked for by you. You didn't initiate the process. There are people who are worried, and this process has been started by somebody else, so there's pressure for them to talk about what decision they want to make, and you want to support them make their decision, if they have capacity. Yeah? That's what you want to do. So you actually want to help them to have their way, as long as they have capacity. So, you just want to hear them out, actually, to start off with. If you can sell that idea to them, look, I think we have the same problem with mental health, people are committed. And the majority of patients do talk to you. There is the occasional one who just won't, clearly, and that's always difficult. And I think where the patient just won't talk, a proposed patient won't talk to you, I think you have to leave it for another day. I don't know what you can do. You have to look at other things, are they medically, are they acutely delirious, is there something else going on? We talked about this actually at the last workshop. Is there something diagnostically you think, they're hypomanic? They're just in a very angry state of mind that's not explained by the intelligence. Because normally you'd expect people would be prepared to start talking, especially as Dan said, positive. So what about the patient who is likely to regain capacity quite soon. You think this is a finely run thing. I mean, is it worth pursuing? Is it the right thing to do? You think within a few days they are going to regain capacity? I suppose it depends if you're in Christchurch, you might want to just flick them over to Stephen. But I think if you're in sort of Hawke's Bay, by the time they get to that, probably regain capacity. So, I mean, that's a clinical judgment, isn't it? I mean, there's sort of obviously procedural things and the assessment things, and I've really set out to talk about how you assess, but the procedural things do dominate the discussion because you can see all kinds of difficulties with this. One of the things we talk a lot about with capacity assessment is setting it up right so that you can do the assessment in the kind of way I alluded to, where you're not hurried and you're not being distracted, and the person will be quite distressed and probably annoyed about the whole thing. So you've got to make sure the environment is right for that assessment to take place, quiet place, not interruptions, don't have the phone ringing during it, have the right support for the person. And I mean, maybe some of these discussions can be helped with maybe a counsellor who knows them well, or a family member who's prepared to be in the room, but do whatever you can to support the person through this assessment, or have those things happen. Insist that that's the procedure, at that time, etc. Choose a time of the day, have appropriate counselling support. So make it as reasonable for yourselves. And as has been said several times, this is not an emergency procedure. This is a planned procedure. So you should be able to set these things up and say, all right, I want this place to do it, and I want to have this much time. Right.